Okay, and we are live. How's it going, Mets and overall baseball fans? Thank you guys all so much for chiming in for the latest podcast episode of Queen's Corner. It's your boy Wardy here. And no, we don't have Joe or Rec today. They will likely be back next episode. Rec is currently having some family fun in Disney, and Joe is busy with his day job. Understandable excuses. But we do have a very special guest here to co-host with me today. If you're watching live on YouTube, on the WardyNYM YouTube channel, or if you're watching on the 7 Line socials, that being their Twitter or Facebook, or even my Twitter at WardyNYM as well. Very happy to have you all in here. But for all the OG followers out there that haven't been following just the Queen's Corner podcast, but especially me with my content creation here on YouTube, then you guys probably know Anthony Rivera. Anthony Rivera, of course, is the host of the Subway to Shea podcast. We actually just bumped into each other last week at the Mets first half of their split doubleheader against the Guardians. It was great to catch up with Anthony, and him and I have collaborated many times before, not last year, but in 2021, kind of like the first full year of both of us doing our respective Mets content creation. I'm really happy to have you on here as a special guest co-host today. So before we break down everything going on the Mets front and all that stuff, Anthony, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm great, Tyler. I appreciate you having me on and thinking of me to, join you for this podcast episode today. And it's crazy to think, we've known each other close to now being 3 years, and
Yeah,
we
is that
finally
crazy?
met each other,
Yeah.
at that Guardians game. So it's an honor to be on here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. Yeah, no, of course. Pleasure's all mine. And, when I was looking into obviously this series and the road trip that was, and you, I'll give you credit where credit's due. I mean, you've had quite the week. So why don't you, before we get into obviously breaking down these ball games and what has been, no pun intended, but there's a pun, a rocky road trip for this Mets team. What's been going on in the land of Anthony as of late?
Yeah, this has kind of been a crazy week for me. I went on The Fan as a guest. It was early in the morning, but a good content creator, Alvin Centron, got an opportunity to host, and he said, "You want to be a guest and talk Mets?" And I said, "Absolutely. I don't care what time it is. I'll talk Mets." So that happened, I think, on Monday morning. So that was a fun time. And then I got Athlete Logos to do an interview on my Instagram Live, and he's become a really good friend, not only to me, but to the podcast. And I really appreciate, all of that he's done, not only just in general for the Mets and content creating and creating his graphics has been amazing. So shout out to him. And yesterday I got the opportunity to go on with Dexter Henry of New York Post SNY and do a little video about wrapping up the Mets. And we're going to probably talk a lot more about it today.
Yeah, I know that's great. Yeah, Dexter's a great guy for SNY, of course, and also Athlete Logos does a great job. Known him for a long time too. Very happy to see, as I was just telling you before we went live here, to see all the fellow Mets content creators really starting to blossom here and get the rightful opportunities that they deserve beyond their own platform. So that's great to see everything that's happening for you, and I wish you continued success. But I mean, one thing I definitely wish continued success for is this Mets team, and we thought we were going to get a lot of that after winning 5 straight games. And unfortunately, now they've dropped 4 of their last 6 games that we saw there. They went 2-4 on this road trip. So, Anthony, raw thoughts about this road trip before I deep dive specific things that I liked, didn't like. Let me hear it.
Yeah, it's a losing road trip. Obviously, they only won 2 games. They should have took both series against the Cubs and the Colorado Rockies. I think one of the more frustrating games for me was watching Marcus Stroman dominate the Mets, and then this whole issue with who said what about him not, showing off and stuff like that. That minus that being said, this team's got to start showing something, because if they don't, they're going to fall behind. And this month of June coming up is probably the toughest month they have. The coasting that they should have had the first 2 months of the season, that's now gone, and they did not take advantage of the opportunity to have a winning road trip and have a winning record. Right now they're at 500 and they are what they are, but they're going to have to start kicking up to higher gear. The pitching needs to be a whole lot better. We're starting to see a little bit of the offense take off now that the kids are in play, and we're going to get into Francisco Alvarez for certain on this podcast and what kind of road trip he's had and what he has done so far to kind of solidify his spot as the number 1 catcher on this team. But, watching yesterday, I don't think I've yelled so much at the TV watching yesterday's game in frustration of this pitching staff that has just been abysmal. They've been abysmal all season long. And, you can blame Tyler McGill. He has a lot to do with that yesterday's loss. But, if you're going to blame him, you got to blame Justin Verlander as well. And this whole rotation just has not played up to the expectations that we expected them.
And another reason why I brought you on is because I felt like you and I would be along the same wavelength with a lot of things, and you certainly took words out of my mouth there. It's unfortunate, but yeah, I agree. As I was just saying in my post-game show yesterday, sharing the frustration after the Mets again dropped their series to the Rockies, losing by a final score of 11-10. The offense the past day plus did everything they could to win both ball games. When you score 17 runs in a 24-hour span, there should be no excuse to not win said ball games, and yet they have nothing to show for it. And yeah, to your point, don't get me wrong, Tyler McGill did not look sharp. He will be the first to tell you that, obviously. Was getting hit hard every single batter felt like he faced there, was leading multiple guys on each inning. And, he, of course, crumbled literally half inning after Francisco Alvarez did what he does best. And that's why we went from talking about Alvarez, on how long is he going to even be on the team to, okay, he might actually have a strong case to be NL Rookie of the Year. Like, that's how much he's progressing in a short time. But to your point about McGill, yeah, no, I agree with you. Don't get me wrong. He did not have a sharp outing at all. And Steven Nagosic, I mean, there's a reason why Nagosic was not supposed to even be in this bullpen to start the season, you could rightfully argue. But Justin Verlander, who's supposed to be your stopper, has yet to give you two consecutive starts that are strong quality outings. He has not been able to do it. We saw what he did against the Tampa Bay Rays. What was it, just over a week ago, right? Gain shelled, getting up 6 earned thanks to Isaac Paredes hitting not one but 2 bombs off of him. Then he comes out and has a masterful second half of the doubleheader against the Guardians, going 8 innings of only 1 earned run ball, 5 strikeouts, command the strike zone so well against a Guardians team that, albeit, has not fared well with their offense so far this year. They have not been that great contact-hitting team that you've seen from last year. They're still trying to get their flow going this season, and now you see him again, even though it's at Coors Field and you're playing the Rockies, it is still hard to justify Justin Verlander giving up another 6th spot. As a guy who's being paid $40 million, even at the age of 40, there's a reason why you're getting this money. You need to be better, and that's why we were giving our rightful criticisms toward Max Scherzer plenty, and now Max is really finally starting to get himself in a groove while he's still dealing with like a thumb blister issue going on there. His last start against the Guardians, in which we were both in attendance, he went 6 strong, 6 shutty, and then of course we saw there against the Rockies, he went to a strong 7 innings. So Max, it's kind of funny how things have flipped now. Max, you're getting the side that you want out of him, and JV, you're still trying to find that consistency. So I agree with you. And when you're looking at what should we criticize most right now, it's certainly that pitching. And we have a whole separate segment that will be going on as to, how can the Mets rectify this internally, externally? What do they need to do as they sit 500, roughly 60 games into the season on this Memorial Day Monday? And also shout out to everyone who has family members or themselves who have served. Of course, happy Memorial Day to you all, to everyone that made the ultimate sacrifice for this great nation. Really, really is appreciated. Thank you guys for watching live or replay here for the latest episode of Queen's Corner. Myself, our special guest, Anthony Rivera at Subway to Shea Podcast. Make sure to check him out after this one whenever you get the chance. But yeah, you look at this series against the Rockies, right? You had offense score. Mets, of course, take game 1 after they dropped their first 2 games against the Cubs, took game 3 comfortably. Big game for the offense again. Then you head into Colorado. You have a nice game 1 win, and game 2, game 2 and game 3 just felt like the same in a lot of ways, where you didn't get the pitching, but you surely had the offense. And who was the driver of said offense that really sparked things in those 2 games? It was Francisco Alvarez, hitting back-to-back games with a 3-run home run. So, he has been electric in his own right. We've seen the splashes of Brandon Nimmo being a triples god that we saw for a 24-hour span. I mean, it felt like everyone and their mother was hitting at least 1 extra base hit in this series. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was ridiculous. But I got to ask, even with all the high-flying offense that you saw from the Mets, that is something to be excited about, hopefully, for days going forward, even though that they're not going to be in a batter's box like Coors. I got to ask, what is necessarily your biggest takeaway coming out of this road trip going 2-4, and what do you think is something that is the biggest issue or the biggest positive for the Mets as they head into their homestand starting against the Phillies?
Well, let's start with the biggest issue. And obviously the biggest issue is the pitching, from starting pitching all the way down to the bullpen. It's been an issue this whole season. So I really don't want to hear, hey, we're playing in Coors Field, so maybe that's, because of the altitude and all that. They have been awful all season long. It's not just Coors Field. This rotation has to go deep into games. And even though Tyler McGill had a very terrible outing, he's been kind of decent for what he's supposed to be. He is supposed to be your 5th starter. You're not supposed to count on him.
And he was supposed to be your 7th starter heading into the year. So let's not forget that.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's not supposed to be the stopper. He's not supposed to be the guy that's, leading the rotation. That's Justin Verlander's job. That's Max Scherzer's job. And you can also, put a little bit, I guess, on Kodai Senga, who, I have grown to know we have to be patient with him coming into this league for the first time. Only, 9-10 starts into the season. So I'm pretty patient with him. Cookie Carrasco coming back from the injury. He had a really good outing that the Mets won that Cubs game. So happy for him to see him back on track, and hopefully he can be consistent. So the Mets need consistency from their starting pitching. And then on top of that, they need them to go deep into these games. Give us 6, give us 7, because the bullpen is now tired. The first month of the season, the bullpen was able to handle it. And now they're struggling. And you can see that with how they've used David Robertson, right? In that homestand, they used him, 4 out of the 5 days?
Yeah.
And we saw after that, he's been giving up runs ever since then. So, you have to find balance with all these bullpen members, and having the starting pitchers go deep into games will stop Dominic Leone coming in every day. It'll stop Jeff Brigham from coming in every day, and Steven Nagosic, who, I kind of supported during this spring and wanting to see him come and make the bullpen. But now we're at a point where he's coming in too many games, and he's starting to get lit up, and he's technically, to me, you can't count him as a Trevor Williams type. He's not that guy. He was not a starter. He was a bullpen piece when he came up with the Mets. So those guys have been struggling. And the one guy that we really should be, talking about too is, Drew Smith. He has not taken that next step to me in being a quality reliever. I mean, he has had a lot of struggles. It started last year after he had that really good shutdown, 2 months. And then I think he hurt his finger. He broke his finger, if you can remember, trying to grab a ball. And then he hasn't been the same since. I know he hasn't given up that many home runs this year, but every time he comes in, you don't know what you're going to get from him. And he should be more of a lockdown and filling in that role that, Robertson or Ottavino were supposed to fit when Edwin Diaz was supposed to be with the team. It was supposed to be Ottavino, Robertson, and Edwin Diaz. And now it's, Robertson's the closer, or Ottavino, you swap them, and even you can include Brooks Raley in there. And Drew Smith is not only supposed to be a middle reliever, he's supposed to be a lockdown, 7th, 8th inning guy, and he hasn't proven that to me yet. So those are the struggles that I see with the Mets so far, and this, pitching staff. That's the biggest problem right now, because we know the offense can, hit now. They've done it over the last week and a half, and they should have won a lot more games than they have. And the positive, obviously, Francisco Alvarez. I mean, that's probably the biggest takeaway to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to say that I'm bothered that the Mets wasted 2 masterful outings from Francisco Alvarez the past 2 games, I mean, is quite the understatement, especially when you're getting the kid as red hot as he is right now, that we're going to dive into a little bit more here in a second. But yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head again regarding the bullpen, and that's something that we had concerns of heading into the year. Obviously, losing your not only all-star closer, but the best reliever in baseball in Edwin Diaz before the season even began will always leave us with those what-ifs on what could have been between, himself, David Robertson, and Ottavino. Because again, they signed Robertson to be necessarily that setup man, or every now and then as that closer when they deem fit, right? So to have Robertson step up the way he has had so far this season has been huge, but you're seeing his last couple outings, he looks a little gassed, and you're not shocked by this, especially when he gave up those runs to J-Ram last weekend against the Guardians, because Ottavino couldn't get it done. And Ottavino's another guy where if Ottavino gets his rest and isn't pitching back-to-back days, you like the chances of Ottavino getting out of an inning unscathed. However, he has also shown that, he is a guy that if worked too much can cause an issue. So there's clear issues with this pitching staff that we have seen, not only with Ottavino on times. Robertson, who I'm going to give benefit of the doubt, has been a stud. I mean, where would the Mets be without David Robertson right now? That's the bigger thing. They would have no reliability in said bullpen. But then you bring on the Dominic Leones, who it's funny how who had on their bingo card he would be the only reliever to pitch 2 scoreless innings throughout that Rocky series, right? I mean, I was biting my tongue when I saw him come in game 2 this series when it was tied 6-6 alone, and he somehow got out of that unscathed. And yesterday he pitched a scoreless inning again. But Drew Smith again is a guy that right now, from what you're getting out of him, I don't like him in high leverage situations at all. I don't. He has yet to prove it. He'll give you a nice little stretch of just looking dominant, and then he'll get hard hit like left and right, like no tomorrow. He's a prime example of this entire Mets pitching staff where you're just not getting consistency right now. And Drew Smith unfortunately falls himself in that category like the rest of them. Tommy Hunter, Tommy pitched a scoreless inning yesterday, but he's a guy that shouldn't be in this Mets bullpen. Realistically, you should be having better depth, quality depth than him. Same thing with Nagosic. It crushes me when you bring up Trevor Williams because he's always the one that got away. I knew he wasn't coming back as soon as the offseason began. Rightfully so. He wanted to be a starting pitcher. He's making that starting pitching money. But man, oh man, Trevor Williams is I don't think not enough Mets fans appreciate Trevor Williams, I feel like, for just how important and imperative his role was as that lawn reliever and can be utilized in basically any situation and come out of it unscathed or at minimum just allowing a run. Like he was always reliable for you. And the Mets don't have anything close to that right now because David Pearson, who has potential of still maybe being a lawn reliever for you this year, has to get his head right in AAA because he was all over the place this year. A guy that the Mets were banking on to start the year in the rotation just was anything but good. I love Peterson's stuff too. That's a frustrating thing, but he just has not had it. And you can tell that mentally he's not there right now to be locked in and have the confidence that he should have to be effective for this team. Joey Ohtani even had 5 starts for the Mets this year, all right? And it's not even June. Like, who would have thought that to begin with? So, yeah, to your point, the pitching is certainly an issue, and we're going to get into here shortly on how that can be rectified internally or externally, but it's a huge factor as to why this team right now is where they're at. And let's not forget that even when the Mets had their 5-game win streak, that wasn't an easy effort. I mean, they came back in multiple games. They had to have historic moments against the Rays, against the Guardians. I mean, they swept that Guardians series, but they won by 1 measly run in each of those games. A coin flip, and that's the other way, and they potentially lose 2 out of 3. So pitching hasn't done themselves any favors in a lot of ways, aside from Max and Verlander's dominance that we saw there. And I will also give credit, because it should not be understated, what Carlos Carrasco did in Chicago for the Mets to help them propel there. That was huge, and hopefully we get more productivity out of Carrasco, because if you can get him as a solid number 5 for you while you have him on the roster this year, then that is a huge help to this rotation that desperately needs it. But yeah, the pitching is certainly a problem, and it's frustrating again when you put up a 7 spot in game 2 and you have nothing to show for it. You still lose 10-7, and then game 3 you put up 10 effing runs, and you still have nothing to show for it. That is something that haunts me. Just the fact alone that you've lost both your series to the Rockies this year is inexcusable one way or the other. And here we are with them sitting at 500 on the year. So to expand more on the positives, at least, because there is certainly that in the kids. And let's start, of course, with the man of the hour, El Troll on the thumbnail, and Francisco Alvarez. Francisco has been good, to say the least. And to credit, of course, Michael Mayer, who does a great job on throwing out some numbers out there. In the month of May, amongst all MLB hitters right now, Francisco Alvarez ranks 3rd with a 397 ISO. 7th with a 193 WRC plus. And for those that don't know what WRC plus means, it's weighted runs created plus. So what that means is 193 WRC plus is that Francisco Alvarez is 93 Francisco Alvarez is like 93% better than the average hitter in baseball right now. The average is 100. He's basically at 200 for a month span. That is unbelievable numbers from a 21-year-old, no less. And he's tied for 7th with a 1.4 F4. Mets, out of all their catchers last year, I'm pretty sure they got a 1.2 or 1.3 WAR total from their catching spot, and they're already getting more productivity out of a month span from a kid who was initially rushed up to the bigs this year to fill in for Omar Narvaez's injury. So I got more statistics I want to say on the Alvarez front, but before I do, Anthony, what has been your biggest takeaway on watching a young stud blossom right before our eyes in such a short period of time?
I mean, not only mammoth home runs, but clutch hits. This guy, 3-run home run for the lead, 3-run home run to tie. I mean, big at-bats after big at-bat for Francisco Alvarez, and they're absolutely no doubters, right? I mean, every home run he's hit has been an absolute no-doubter. You cannot, under any circumstances, believe that this kid is going to be sent back down. I don't care what anyone says in the media. There's no possible way that this kid gets sent down. For Nito, well, Nito's here, but for anyone coming back, Narvaez, this kid can't go anywhere.
So
He
you're
has
telling me
to be the
Buster Olney
starting
was
catcher.
wrong?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Let's not even get started on him.
Yeah, you're
But yeah,
telling me.
Francisco Alvarez is not going anywhere. He's half of your offense right now. And that's including with, Francisco Lindor, who, quietly has been having, a tough time. I mean, he'll have his home runs and at bats, he'll have some clutch hits, but
He's
this
so
weekend
weird
he
this
struggled.
year. He's
It's
so
weird.
weird.
The slumping is huge. And I think part of it has to do with, him exerting a lot of effort during the World Baseball Classic, which,
Could be, for
I
sure.
love the World Baseball Classic, but you play an extra month of full force baseball before you get ready to start the season. And I'm pretty sure he's exerted a lot of energy. He can do with a day off. I mean, whether he's sitting for an entire game, whether he is DHing just a game, he needs a break because he is struggling right now to find consistency. And we know he's a streaky hitter, but I don't know, man. This year's struggles, you watch him at the plate, you watch the way his at bats go, you see some of the strikeouts he's been making, and they're just not good. So I worry about him. But like we said with Francisco Alvarez, I mean, the kid has been a stud. I mean, we know from him coming up, right? We've watched the journey, and he's always struggled to start. Every time he's been called up to a different level, and he's found his way, and he has seemed to have found his way to the point where now we're starting to see him get pushed up the lineup. We saw him at number 2 on
Which
Sunday.
Is crazy that he got moved up that high, filling for McNeil there.
Yeah, because the thing is, he needs the same thing with Alonso. He needs protection.
Yep.
And the reason why I was okay with him batting ninth was Brandon Nimmo was going to protect him and do it well. You can't have him ahead of a Daniel Vogelback who's going to sit there and take 3 strikes, or Mark Canha who can't, who's struggling. Tommy Pham, who outside of yesterday has struggled most of the season. He needs protection. I would have put him probably in between Beatty and Marte, Marte's also struggling. But yeah, he needs protection just like Alonso needs. And we're seeing the fruits of that labor. You put him in between Lindor, you put him behind ahead of Nimmo, and we're seeing good things out of him. If we could just get something out of the 7th and 8th hitter, and if Marte can get back to what we know he could be, this offense could be hitting on full cylinder, man.
It's crazy. We talk about the 7-8-9, right? And you have to give credit where credit's due. The Mets had that yesterday. Buck, of course, had a wily lineup that we saw with Alvarez in the 2-hole. McNeil started the day off the bench with some slight groin tightness. Came in later in the game of the 9th. Of course, got a pinch hit single. That was eventually a scored run, because of course he does. But then you saw the 7-8-9, that being of Canha, Escobar, and Pham. What order was it again? Was it Pham, Canha? I think it was Pham, Canha, Escobar, and Pham was electric. Pham looked like a guy that knows that his job could be on the line sooner than later. That's what I got taken away from yesterday. Really sharp eyeing from him, and he deserves credit for that. Pham, you could argue, was the best player for the Mets yesterday, all things considered, right? And then Canha got on base a couple times, but he's still really struggling to find the strike zone. A guy who really thrived last year in that not utility role, but not playing every day because he was balancing things with the Jankowskis of the world or whoever it may be. He just looks like a shell of what he once was last year. Mark Canha was best last year when he was grinding out at bats and not only taking walks, not only hit by pitches, but getting those clutch hits when you need them to, especially as he headed into the summertime. So Canha has definitely been a disappointment overall this season. And then Eduardo Escobar, who in a very limited role, especially from the right side of the plate, has really been productive. So Eddie's a guy that I'm a huge proponent on keeping him off the bench and starting him every now and then when you want to deem best fit there as a righty batter, mostly. But yeah, I mean, the bottom of the order wasn't the issue yesterday. It truly just was that pitching as a whole. But I do want to emphasize a little bit more just on Francisco Alvarez and how damn good he has been, because this month alone in 21 games, right, you're getting 7 home runs, 17 RBIs, a 309 average, a 382 OBP, a 1,000 just under 100 OPS, and again, a 143 TOPS plus and a 190 SOPS plus. I mean, Who would have thought, even after his first 2 weeks of the season in which he was anything but good, Alvarez, he was taking fastballs up high and he was swinging right through them. He was ground ball machine. He was anything but good offensively. Defensively has looked stellar since day one. That has always been a massive improvement that we're happy to see. But you saw after those rough 2 weeks, you heard it credit throughout the Mets dugout and stuff. It's been reported that he would head to games as early as 1:30 for a 7 o'clock game, and he's just looking at film constantly. He's nitpicking what he's doing right and what he's doing wrong. Now, instead of swinging right through fastballs up high, he's either taking them or he's ripping them to deep left like he did yesterday for his second consecutive game with a 3-run home run. And he had 3 bombs in this road trip alone. Just masterful stuff that we're getting from Francisco Alvarez. And now it's a fair argument to be had that he is quite literally the best catcher in baseball right now over the past month. I even got into some back and forth with some Braves fans that were bothered by that, but statistically he is. The past month alone, there's no better catcher in baseball right now than Francisco Alvarez. And you of course have the Orioles fans advocating for Adley Rutschman, and rightfully so. Adley's a stud, love him. But the biggest thing that I was always so excited about Alvarez was that you look at what Adley's doing, and Adley's is at least 3 years older than Alvarez, if not 4. So I knew that by Alvarez being up as soon as he is, if he would be anything productive, then his ceiling amasses any catcher out there right now in the game of baseball. So to see him not only be in the bigs right now, but dominate at the age of 21, the youngest catcher in baseball right now, should have every single fan and their mother damn excited about not just the now, but the future ahead. I mean, the Mets may have just found their offensive options to rectify this lineup internally. Should Alvarez, I'm not expecting Alvarez to be, a basically a double better than the average hitter all year long. He's going to go through slumps. Pitchers are going to be more aware on how to approach him. But the point stands. Alvarez, even when he will be in his slumps, will give you supreme, great stuff there at the backstop defensively. So, I mean, the Mets have a huge weapon now in their lineup and at the backstop almost daily, as long as Buck plays him consistently. And then you get into the other guys and the Brett Beattys and the Mark Vientoses of the world. So, share a little bit more of your opinion on those two in particular.
Yeah, I think bringing those two up really helped, Francisco Alvarez start to feel comfortable, right? Because he came up for the home opener, right? Everybody, when Omar Narvaez got hurt, right, in that Milwaukee series, they brought up Francisco Alvarez to back up Tomas Nido, and he was by himself, right? Then Brett Beatty came along, and he's been playing well at third base, won the starting job over Eduardo Escobar, and now we have Mark Vientos, and now the three of them who have grown up from the minors are together and playing together. And I think they're feeding off of each other. And the rest of the team, the veterans on the team, are even taking that away from them as well, right? Because, we hear all about, Scherzer working with Alvarez and the pitching staff wanting to work with him on a consistent basis where, at the beginning of the season, it was like, okay, we're not going to have him catch Kodai Senga because we don't know how he's going to do the ghost forkball. And now he's caught 2 of his games already. One of them was Kodai Senga's probably best game that he's pitched against Tampa of all teams. So, seeing Alvarez do well because these kids, the rest of them, Beatty as well coming up and Vientos, who Vientos should start getting more playing time. I know Buck said he's going to play him the 3 games, which were the last 2, including and then tomorrow. Probably tomorrow as well. He's got to get more playing time. And, I don't want him to just play third base and take Beatty out of the equation.
Yeah, I agree.
If that's the case, put Beatty at left field, let him play because honestly, he's probably a better option than Pham and Canna with his bat.
Yeah, let's not forget what Beatty did over this road trip too. I mean, he had himself 3-4 RBIs at minimum. Yes, he wasn't hitting consistently every at bat, but to your point, I'm sure you can agree with this. I just love a hitter that knows how to spread the field, and all Beatty does is go oppo. You don't see him pulling the ball much. And as a Conforto lover too, during his time with the Mets, I'm seeing that in spades once again here with Beatty. But go back to what you're saying.
Yeah, no, and he's got power as well. So play all the kids. I do respect the way that the Mets have brought them into this team. Doing it piece by piece because you bring them all up at once, they're all slumping. You have no offense right now. How are these guys going to? They're going to send them down. They're not. They brought him up piece by piece. Alvarez has now earned his spot. We saw Beatty earn his spot. Now it's time for Vientos to get that opportunity. And, watching watching Daniel Vogelback over the last couple of days, it looks like he's checked out, honestly. I don't know. To me, it looked like he's checked out. He's leaving the
just
bat on
really
his
slumping
shoulders.
right now.
Oh, my goodness. It's like, to me, what is the purpose of having him on this team or playing him if he's just going to leave the bat on his shoulders and he doesn't play a position? Which, I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about who we can bring up later on in the show. But, yeah, let Vientos start playing a little more. Let him start playing against, right-handed pitchers. I want to see if he can do it. I want to see if he can do it. We see Beatty can hit lefties. Let's see if Vientos can hit righties. And in that home run he had to tie the game, that was against the righty. Yeah. So let's see what they can do.
And again, you're 100% right, because Vientos, out of his 14 home runs this year, one, of course, in the bigs and the 13 others being in AAA, 12 of those 14 are against right-handed pitchers. So you can't even justify that, oh, no, like we should develop him as a platoon. No, we shouldn't. That's the exact reason why Vogelback is so limited as he is, because from early on in his career, he was utilized in a platoon role, when if you ask Vogelback, he'll be the first to tell you that I've never had an issue seeing the ball from left-handed pitching, but based on my early metrics, teams just decided utilize me against only righties, and that has hurt his development, if that makes sense. That's why Vogelback would be nothing more than what he is right now at his best, which is a very good OBP guy against right-handed pitching, gets on base with a solid clip, of course, is not a threat at all on the base pass, and is not a position player. So that's the issue with the Vogelback and how limited he is, if you will, and that's what makes a bigger argument with why I'm personally not in favor of this platoon mindset that the Mets initially utilized last year, and we saw it pretty much fall flat on their face. Platoons work well for certain position players based on matchups daily to keep guys fresh, but at the DH position, what do you need most at the DH position? You want power. You always want power there. And the Mets are not going to get that unless they give consistent reps to Mark Vientos there. And I'm sorry, I'm even against playing Brett Beatty much in left field at all. Beatty's defense at third base has been nothing short of sharp, far above than maybe what some people initially expected heading into the year. Let him continue to develop there, because he is likely going to be the Mets' third baseman, hopefully the next at minimum 5, 10 plus years, right? He should be your next long-term third baseman for the first time since David Wright. And Mark Vientos just isn't that. Mark EV has never profiled well with his glove, and he's a situation where you should justify playing him every day. And I'm glad that Buck is now, but shouldn't just be because 2 of the 3 starting pitchers at the Mets have faced during the span, including tomorrow, are southpaws. It should be regardless of the pitching matchup, and it should be at DH to see how much opportunities he has and takes advantage of over, say, a month span, because this is something that I've been highlighting a lot, Anthony. I'm sure you can agree with or at least relate to. Give the kids a leash now with what we've seen with Beatty and Alvarez in their own right. Now do the same with Vientos. See what you have of them for the first half of the season, because then you can make the proper decision, Billy Upler and everyone around him, to say, hey, we gave the kids a leash. If they were underperforming, it's like, all right, we gave them a leash. Now we're going to go try to seek external options for a team in a win now stage, and wants to make sure they can bolster their lineup, something they didn't do until it was too little too late last year, and then sat on their hands and rushed up kids that had no MLB experience, and you could tell the nervous jitters were there and often. So give them that leash early. That's what I'm liking them seeing. But that shouldn't stop now. Continue it with Vientos. And now we get into that same argument that could be had. And I understand this is more of a controversial one, because defensively he needs plenty more reps there at second base, and he hasn't even played the left field yet. But if you could make an argument, there's something to be said about Ronnie Mauricio, who leads all minor leagues right now in hits, is on an 18-game, hitting streak or on base streak, one of the two at least. He's turning the cover off the ball. Switch hitter, who of course has thrived from the left side of the plate. And I'm not just saying that because he has his signature on the inside of my hat here from spring training. Ronnie has really done a great job all year long. He's a workhorse. He played 67 out of 71 games in the Dominican Winter League. He's missed all but one game in AAA this year, in which there was some rumors going on a couple of days ago during this road trip if he was going to be called up, because he finally got an off day. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Ronnie Mauricio? And while he isn't going to help this Mets pitching staff by any stretch, what are your thoughts on him right now? And when do you think, if at all, we could potentially see him up with the club?
I'm thinking sometime in July we'll see Ronnie Mauricio. And I think that, if, these guys like Vogelback or Pham continue to struggle, I think you got to bring back Luis Guillorme for another time. We need a defensive player, position player in that infield. I like I said earlier, Francisco Lindor needs a little bit of time of rest, and maybe, bringing back Guillorme might help that. He might not help out offensively, but we've seen what these kids already are doing offensively. You could bring up Ronnie Mauricio, yeah, and he can help out the offense. And obviously, he'll learn second base up here, just like, Beatty's been playing well and Alvarez has been playing well. But, he's not going to help the pitching staff, that's for sure. Because if they, score runs, we already saw, look at those 3 games that Alvarez hit home runs, big mammoth, clutch home runs. They lost all 3 games. So, they're going to need pitching as well. They don't have that on the farm. And if they decide that they want to trade this kid for an arm, they're going to need him to be playing every day, down in AAA. So unless you're going to keep him, if you're keep him and, Daniel Vogelback continues to struggle and squander his opportunity, then you bring him up. But I do think that they should consider bringing up Luis Guillorme back first and getting, Lindor a day off here, day off there. And same thing with second base and third baseman. They need some rest and to keep them fresh. And Buck has been doing his best to keep all these players fresh, right? I mean, everyone complains about why is Pham starting? Why is Canna starting? Why is Escobar starting? Well, Buck has to try to keep this, offense fresh. Francisco Alvarez can't play every day. So we're going to see Thomas Nido at some point play a game here and there. He's not going to be starting. Those days are over. We all know that. Francisco Alvarez is the starter. And I think when Omar Narvaez comes up as well, he's going to know that Francisco Alvarez is the starter. But, they're going to need rest some days. Maybe he'll DH some days. You're going to see Eduardo Escobar. You're going to see Canna. You want to see less of those guys. They should be coming off the bench, but they're going to be playing. So I think that bringing up Guillorme right now should be the option. Let Mauricio cook down in AAA, continue to hit offensively, and continue to grow as a second baseman.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument too, and give credit where credit's due. Guillorme, since being sent down, has been hitting really well. He's taking advantage, of this opportunity. Knows that he's a guy that, with his glove alone and his utility, not a guy that we expected to be down there all year. And if he can get back to hopefully being that solid contact hitter that we saw last year, then it's more justified to bring him back up, because he will give you more options and opportunity than, say, what you're getting from at least one guy on the bench right now. So that's a fair argument, and I'm not disagreeing with that. I do think, however, that over the next month, we will be hearing some significant news on the Ronnie Mauricio front, whether that is him actually being sent up or the Mets reaching a decision where they're really struggling to get production still from Vogelback and or Canna and or Pham. Well, at least one of those guys, or it promptly justifies giving Mauricio the call, because the Mets have seen in a short sample size how much it has benefited their lineup by bringing up said kids, albeit for different reasons depending on who you're talking about. In Alvarez because of injury, Beatty because of Eddie's lack of performance, and Vientos again because of Vogelback. Really, it's going to be interesting to follow for sure. But who would have thought that we're not even in June and we have 3 top prospects all thriving, or at least starting to, and hopefully we'll see what Mauricio brings sooner rather than later, because damn is he exciting. I mean, people, he has really flipped the script in my head. I talked for years about Mauricio as that ultimate trade chip, and now he's a guy that might not even be ranked in MLB's top 100 prospects, but he might just be one of the most impactful batters out there as soon as he hits the bigs with the way that he is playing and has been for the past almost calendar year now. He has been that sharp. But now let's get into the negative again, which is pitching. If you're watching, for people watching live on YouTube, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button as you're chiming in for the latest episode of Queen's Corner Podcast. Myself, Wardy, and my special guest co-host today, that being Anthony Rivera, host of the Subway to Shape podcast. But let's talk about the pitching. So we emphasized how bad it has been, and it certainly has. It's been Jekyll and Hyde. You're getting a really nice stretch, and then you're getting a bad stretch. And I shouldn't even say really nice stretch, because the Mets haven't had anything more than a couple days of strong starting pitching, right? Because as I noted earlier, their 5-game win streak was not because of great pitching throughout that entire span either. The game where they finally started to turn their season around, in which I was in attendance, when Alvarez hit that game-time bomb against the Rays and Alonso walked it off, pitching did everything they could to make sure the Mets didn't win that game. From Carlos, from Kodai Senga, again, shoving. Then it was the bullpen afterwards. I mean, the bullpen was just not doing any favors there whatsoever. There was even one other game, too. I think it was the Mets. Did the Mets lose that game? I think the Mets lost that game. No, they did. They won. I'm sorry. When they won game 1 against the Guardians, Carrasco imploded. Everyone imploded out there, right? And they somehow, some way still lugged out that victory in extras 10-9. But pitching-wise, Anthony, if you had to pick internally and externally, What do you want the Mets to do about this either rotation and or bullpen? And how soon do you think that they will address it?
It would suit them to address this as soon as possible, right? I mean, you can only wait so much longer and see, like we've talked about, Dominic Leone, Jeff Brigham, Nagosic. We can only see those guys, Tommy Hunter. We can only see those guys so many times come out and struggle. Even Drew Smith to a certain point, but I don't think Drew Smith is going. I think he has a longer leash. The Mets do need starting pitching, and they do need bullpen help at some point. I said the trade deadline. People are saying even sooner, which, I tend to agree with. But the Mets, usually give a long leash to this. And, we're still having a month where, we didn't have Justin Verlander for the first month of the season. So he's still acclimating himself. We lost Cookie for most of the season. So he's still coming back. Kodai Senga's still adjusting, and you're seeing it because the Mets are, stretching out his days. He's not pitching every fifth day. They're giving him rest some days. Tyler McGill, you're going to have a lot of growing pains with. It's not like the rotation last year, right? You had a lockdown Chris Bassett in the middle of the rotation. You had also Taiwan Walker also helping out that rotation. So it's not the same. We're without Quintana as well. So that's been a struggle, not having his consistency. The Mets really need to figure this out, and I don't really know if there's internal help. I don't follow the minor leagues to a T, so I keep hearing the names Blade Tidwell come up. The Calvin Zieglers, who I don't think is close at all. I think he got drafted last year by the Mets, but I don't see a lot of pitching depth in the minors outside of, David Peterson and Lucchesi. So they're going to have to figure out something soon, whether it's to make a trade or, sign someone off the scrap heap. But then it's, back to trying to see if this guy can, be a reclamation project. And the Mets don't need that at this point in time. They really need the stars they have, like Justin Verlander, to be locked down for 5-6 starts in a row. They need, Scherzer to be that lockdown pitcher for the next 8 starts. They need that, because without that, this team is going to struggle. You got 2 starting pitchers, 2 aces who are, getting north of 40. You have Kodai Senga, who, is going to take time and needs his rest. You got Cookie Carrasco, who could be up and down. And you have Tyler McGill, who he's your 5th starter. That's basically what he's supposed to be. And you have him pitching like he's supposed to be a 3rd starter. And that shouldn't be like that to him or to the team themselves. And they need length, and they're not getting it. That's a problem. And anyone that they bring in off the scrap heap is not going to do that for them. Who did they bring in? Dylan Bundy, who got lit up all over AAA. He's not even an option.
Yeah, to explain briefly on Bundy, the Mets signed him late, didn't have a proper spring train. Of course, was doing his own work separately from being with an organization, but had a longer build up, got cooked from day one and still has been, and I know was suspended for 10 games for having sticky substances. And the day after, Eric Orzi, who was once a interesting name for the pen for the past year or two, aside from his injuries, the same thing happened to him. So I don't know if the Mets are purposely having guys test things to see what they can get away with per se before hitting the bigs. I'm not too sure. It's an interesting philosophy to say the least. But yeah, the pitching depth just isn't there. It's hilarious. Another year where on paper the Mets look like they had it. And again, this is the New York Metropolitans. Of course, they're running out Joey Lucchesi over this past month, when he was never even expected to have any start this year. That isn't a slight on Lucchesi, because he was fine for what he was, especially his first start against the Giants in San Fran. I mean, talk about having a game for the ages, your first start in like a year, and you go out and have 7 shutty, right? He was just absolutely phenomenal. But the point stands is that the Mets certainly need help with not only the rotation, but with the bullpen as well. So do you think that this is something dire enough where the Mets should be addressing it externally this early in the season? Or do you think that this is something where they can kind of stand pat, loom around 500, a little bit above 500, getting closer to the trade deadline, and hope that the reinforcements of Jose Quintana that we'll be getting prior in July will, of course, be helpful, but adding on and make sure that you, again, just add as much depth as you can. Because if there's one thing I know we've been seeing people in the chat talk about this, the Braves fans who have been getting us off topic, which is always beautiful. The Braves bullpen has been struggling a lot this year. Just as an example, the reason why I bring this up is because the Mets fall themselves in the same category. And the Braves, being a winning organization the way that they are, they're not going to sit on their hands. They are 100% going to make sure that they address things to the best of their abilities. My question to you is, how soon do you think the Mets should actually try to address things on the pitching front?
With the starting pitching, I'd probably give it another couple of turns in the rotation to see if, Max and Justin can be consistent. Kodai's saying obviously he's got the learning curve. Even Carrasco, can he be consistently good? At some points he was last year. At some points he was, the ace when everybody was hurt. So can he get back to the form he was last year? And Tyler McGill is also a learning experience as well. And if he can, he hasn't been bad all season. He's been pretty decent for what a fifth starter should be. But, obviously he struggles in some games. And Sunday was, a big example of it. So I'm going to give the starting rotation another couple of go-arounds, especially with what we're about to be approaching in June, which is probably the toughest month so far in the schedule. If this team can finish above 500 or right around 500 at the end of June, I think that's when you start making the decisions of what you're going to do. The bullpen can use some type of arm, whether it's, you're bringing up Lucchesi to be the long man, or I think even Eliezer Hernandez, it should be coming back soon, who they traded with Jeff Brigham for from the Marlins. So maybe these guys can, be a little shot in the arm, but the bullpen definitely needs some mixing up, and the sooner the better for them.
Yeah, bullpen for sure. I think you can get more turns for this rotation. Absolutely where things stand right now. Because, again, the Mets haven't really had everyone on the same wavelength because of injuries, at all yet this year. So give them more turns. I agree with that. I want to see JB hopefully giving the Mets consecutive every fifth day strong starts. Once we get that going, that'll be great too. Cookie's a guy who we saw eat some solid innings for the Mets last year. And then as we got towards the second half of the season, really faltered. I mean, Carrasco became what was the Taijuan Walker in 2021 in the second half last year, I think is a good example on Cookie's demise, unfortunately. So he's not a guy that we can be reliant of, in my opinion, but it's definitely something to look at and say, okay, yes, give them a little bit more of a turn. Bullpen is a different story, however. Bullpen definitely needs to be addressed sooner. And that's where we get into an interesting conversation on the future of one of Vogelbach, Pham, Canha, and Tomas Nido. Tomas Nido is only going to be on this team until Narvaez returns. I don't see how you can figure things out any other way. They're not going to roll three catchers on this team. And I like Nido just as much as the next guy at his best. He's a very strong framer, hit well where he was the scoring position last year. But the reality is he's the Mets' number 3 catcher right now, because you can't even justify starting Narvaez consistently over Alvarez until maybe Alvarez gets in a significant slump. But I would still argue you want him to play through that as long as it's not a detriment to the Mets winning and losing ball games, right? So Nido, you're either going to DFA or you're going to consider via trade. And this leads me to my point about Mauricio. If the Mets do decide to potentially bring up Mauricio, even if they don't, you can still make this argument, actually, if, say, they bring up Gourmet, one of the two, then you're like, okay, if you're going to trade one of Vogelbach, Pham, or Canha, pair one of those guys at minimum with Nido, trade them somewhere where you can get some relief help with guys on options, and just see what you have there. The Mets can never have enough pitching depth, and that's better versus, say, just cutting ties with guys entirely. If there is any available market for either of those guys to just give you some type of innings eaters in the short term before you can properly address things better for the remainder of the season, why not go ahead and pursue that?
I know if I was only given 2 options. Option A is to keep Nido and have 3 catchers on board, or option B is to keep Daniel Vogelbach. I'm going to go with the 3 catcher option, because to me Daniel Vogelbach provides nothing. Honestly, if he is not doing what he's supposed to be doing as a DH, and when we think of DHs, I obviously David Ortiz, Edgar Martinez, those type of DHs, right? The power hitters, run producers. I obviously he'll never get to that point, or I'm not even trying to compare him to those guys. Probably more a good comparison would be a Matt Stairs type when Matt Stairs went to Philly, right? I mean, he'd come off the bench, he'd hit a big home run. That's something that you want to and expect from a Daniel Vogelback, and he's just not providing that. And if he's not providing any offense, if he's not getting on base, and he's not providing any defense, there's no point to having him on this team. That's just my opinion. I'm pretty sure he's a nice guy. I don't want to get on him about that, but he's not providing anything for this team. He's just taking up a spot to me. Yeah. That's just my opinion on Vogelback. So I would rather keep Nito and have 3 catchers, or like you said, bring up Mauricio, or in my case was to bring up Guillorme. But at some point, Daniel Vogelback cannot be on this team moving forward because he just doesn't provide anything. To me, I think Frank Terzio here on Facebook, he's clogging up a roster spot. So I definitely agree with that.
I think the only way that Vogelback is on this team for the entirety of the season is if he gets really hot at some point sooner than later, but that'll also be at the detriment of, say, Viento's playing time. So it's like, it's a double-edged sword, if you will. There's no way for that to really even happen unless Buck continues to roll him out consistently. So, that maybe he would be good in a limited role. I'm not too sure, but what I am sure of is that Vogelback right now, while, again, it's crazy when you look at his numbers, he's like one of the best OBP guys in baseball against right-handed pitching. But it's such a flawed stat when you're actually watching him day by day and for what his role was. If he was a left fielder, this would be a completely different discussion. If he was like Mark Canha, for instance, but a left-handed hitting left fielder that gets on base at a ridiculously good clip against right-handed pitching and plays a solid outfield, what are we talking about? Of course he's going to be on the team, right?
Yeah.
There's no debating that. But when you're a DH and you provide a little power for a guy that pushing 300, you would imagine that he would be providing power, and he's not. That's just not his game. At best, you're getting 20 home runs for him this year, and at this rate, he's certainly not doing that with the Mets. No. It's frustrating. It is frustrating to say the least. But let's get into now our second to last segment, getting close to the end here. Appreciate everyone watching live or on replay. If you guys are watching on the 7 Line socials, make sure to hit that like, that heart button, whatever you need to do. Make sure to follow the 7 Line, of course, for being great partners here with the Queen's Corner podcast. Also, make sure to check out my good friend Anthony Rivera at his Subway to Shea podcast that he does weekly. You can check it out wherever you get your audio podcasts. And, of course, if you're watching here on YouTube, the WardyNYM YouTube channel, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button for your boy. It's greatly appreciated. But let's talk about this Phillies series now. As of now, I am planning to be tomorrow's game behind home plate with a buddy of mine who's a Phillies fan, so I'm hoping it's a miserable night for him. He's even going out of his way to do the drive, so hopefully it's a one-sided affair. But I'm looking forward to tomorrow night's game with Kodai Senga on the bump, as the Mets will have Senga matching up against the southpaw Ranger Suarez, who has had his fair share of success against the Mets that we've seen in recent years. I mean, just a year and a half ago, Ranger Suarez looked unhittable for this Phillies team. This year, however, hasn't been necessarily the same case. He has a roughly 10-year array, and only a couple starts dealing with injuries still. Ranger Suarez will definitely be an interesting start for him, how the Mets can hopefully take advantage against a lefty that hasn't had his sharpest stuff yet this season. Then in game 2, you have Aaron Nola, who Aaron Nola is such a fascinating starter. You either love him or hate him in regards to production. I think Nola is actually, some people call him overrated. My co-host Joe thinks he's overrated. I think Nola is actually one of the more slept-on starters in baseball.
I'd take him in this rotation right now.
Yeah, and he will be a free agent at the end of the year. He has just under a 4. He has right around a 4.5-year array on the season, and he's facing off against Carlos Carrasco in game 2. And then game 3, it's former Met now foe and Taijuan Walker making his first start back at Citi Field against Max Scherzer. So when you look at these pitching matchups, especially facing Taijuan in game 3. What are you looking for in this series against a Phillies team that right now is 3 games below 500, split their series out of a 4-game set against the Atlanta Braves?
Yeah, it's crazy to think these two teams are where they are right now. The Phillies going to the World Series last year, the Mets making the playoffs with 101 wins, second in franchise history, and they're both struggling, both having a hard time, and you're waiting for these two teams to kick it up into high gear. And this is a big series, right? This is a big series for both teams. I mean, if the Phillies take this series, that could be a launching pad for them. Same thing could be said for the Mets as well. So the Mets are going to have to really play well and win win the series, right? Because we saw last season, the Mets didn't always sweep teams, but they won almost every series. You win series, you put yourself in good position to be in the playoffs. And I think I saw, what are they, their game or a half game out of the wild card right now. We know they're about 4 or 5 games out of the division. The Braves haven't run away with it just yet. So,
Surprisingly, I know the
yeah.
Mets are like 5 or 6 games back right now, but from how the Mets had that month of baseball, the fact that they're not at least 10 out was really mind-boggling to me. Just shows you that the season is certainly a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah, and we saw with Stroman, don't be surprised if Taijuan Walker pitches very well against the Mets. I wouldn't be surprised. They struggle against lefties, so they're going to have probably issues with Ranger Suarez as well. We know what Aaron Nola could be. He could be a really good pitcher, or he'll have a really bad start. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't mind having him in this rotation as well. But we'll see what happens. And I think not getting out of this series, but I think it's back to back where the Mets are going to face Taijuan Walker at the end of this series. And then on Friday to start the Blue Jays series, it's Chris Bassett. I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, hopefully the Mets can have better luck than what they did against a previous Met in Stroman. Taijuan is certainly hittable. He has not had a great start to the season by any stretch, has dealt with some forearm issues too, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And then Chris Bassett didn't look great to start the season. However, he's had some really sharp outings for the Blue Jays. The biggest concern with me for Bassett, try not to get on a tangent here about the Blue Jays because that's a step ahead. But I will say is that it's the pitch clock. When he signed with the Blue Jays, that was one of those things where it's like, I would have liked him to return. He was actually the one starter out of the whole group that I thought was going to return. And I was wrong in that. But I also didn't expect the Mets to land Kodai Senga at the beginning of the offseason either. So, they had a complete turmoil on that rotation and something that hopefully will still be impactful throughout the season. But Bassett, we knew how he faltered towards the end of last year. Just was not clutching up when you need him to. His stuff really got beat up around. And now, again, this year with the Blue Jays, the pitch clock for a guy that is normally shaking off 7 pitches per at bat, it's crazy that he's been able to adjust on the fly. But again, that's what good starters do. So, but heading back into the Phillies series for a second, they of course have their weapons of Bryce Harper, who returned way ahead of schedule from his Tommy John surgery, and that's what great players do, right? Even though that he's not a pitcher, it's still impressive to see him return as soon as he did. Trey Turner, who's still trying to get in the groove since the World Baseball Classic, similar to Lindor. Lindor has been an extra base hits god, so I don't want to compare the two right now. Turner has not been faring as well as what Lindor has this season, but both of them have had slumps in their own right separately. Trey has started to turn on a little bit as of late, but still getting acclimated to his new team there in Philly with Harper. And then you, of course, have Schwarber, who's always a Mets killer. So especially with Max on the bump, I'm like, walk his ass every single time, give him Bonds treatment. Felt like every single bomb that Max gave up last year was to Schwarber, especially in that first half. Yeah. Thankfully, the Mets still won those games, but that was frustrating. So they have a really deep line. Nick Castellanos, too, is having a very good year offensively. Alec Bohm, Bryson Stott. Like that lineup is no joke. But similar to the Mets, their pitching has been Jekyll and Hyde this year. Their main guy has, of course, been Zach Wheeler, who will always pain me to say. But this is definitely a series where, looking at this Phillies matchup, you need to put your best foot forward to win 2 out of 3. I'm not expecting a sweep. I wasn't expecting a sweep from either series out west against the Cubs or the Rockies as is, and they couldn't even manage to win a series against either. But I do think we are going to see some solid, more heroic baseball this home stretch. I'm not trying to jinx things. I'm just saying that because this Mets team at home definitely has a fire under their ass a bit more. Yes, that Rockies series and the National series when the Mets were in their slump didn't help, but that was before we really saw the surgence of Alvarez and Beatty and now Vientos. These guys are certainly lighting a fire under the asses of this entire team, and you can tell that at home with good crowds, they ride off of that momentum. This Mets team has been better at home than they have been on the road, and they haven't played at home a lot either, so definitely looking for at least a series win in this 3-game set against the Philadelphia Phillies before they have a big weekend against the Blue Jays. But before we get to wrapping things up, anything specific that you would like to go over, Anthony, regarding this Mets team?
I would like them to take game 1 tomorrow. I think that's very important for them to get game 1 out of the way, and then you can, point around with the final 2 games. You mentioned the Mets and, home cooking and playing well at Citi Field. Kodai Senga, I think, has a 1 point something ERA at home, where he struggles more mightily on the road. So if we could get a really good performance out of Kodai Senga, because I really do feel you got 2 high-powered offenses here. with Philly and the Mets, and it could be a high scoring game throughout the whole series, like just the way it was in Colorado. So, get that first game, let Kodai cook, and they have to win this series. It's a must. Like, this is a must series. I know it's early still, May. This is a must win series to me, especially in the division where, you don't play the Phillies as much as you used to, and the rest of the teams in the NL East. This is a must win series to me, and they got to get it going. They got to get it going starting now.
If you can win the first two and avoid that rubber game, that would be massive. I know I'm probably getting ahead of myself as the Mets get shelled with myself in attendance tomorrow, but Kodai, to your point, has been stellar at home. Was a privilege seeing him in person against the Rays, in which, again, he carved up 12 strikeouts against, at the time, a red-hot Rays team, the best in baseball, right? So that'd be great to see more of that for certain against a Phillies team, no less, that hasn't seen Kodai yet. So I'm interested to see what that matchup is going to be like. And then, of course, Carlos Carrasco game 2. That's the make or break. If you can get 5 top 6 solid innings of even just 3 earned run ball, even 4, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. That could be enough for this Mets team. So I'm just hoping that more than anything, the rotation can give them length. It won't be easy against a powered offense in the Phillies when they have everything locked and loaded, ready to go. But if you can get at least 6 innings from each of these starters, that would be massive. And that should hopefully prevail this Mets team. Because one thing we know is that when the Mets get a starting pitcher to go at least 6 innings, they're undefeated this season. And that is something that needs to be said. So hopefully you get some quality starts, and hopefully we get a series W. But guys, that is going to do it for the live show. I appreciate everyone so much for chiming in live or on replay for the latest edition of the Queen's Corner podcast. Once more, everyone, a round of applause for Anthony Rivera coming on for a special guest episode here. Really appreciate Anthony. And before we get out of here, if you have any plugs you'd like to share or anything coming up in your life as a Mets content creator, by all means, make sure to do so.
Once again, thank you for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity. Again, it's always great talking with you and, chiming up about the Mets. Just follow me on Twitter, Instagram, on TikTok at Subway to Shea. I have a YouTube page. Excuse me. I have a YouTube page, which you can follow as well, Subway to Shea. Haven't posted as much on there, but I'll be doing that soon. And I write for Rising Apple, so you can see my articles at risingapple.com. So appreciate it, man. This was fun. And anytime you need me, I'll be here.
I appreciate that. And again, shout out to everyone watching live or on replay. Shout out to Chris, shout out to Grant, shout out to all the OGs, Elliot, all you guys watching live means a lot. People on replay, same applies. Let us know in the comments down below your biggest takeaway from today's episode. Everyone, enjoy your Memorial Day, especially for all those who have had family members that have served.